Hi, Michaela.
Hi, Steve.
Well, today we're going to do another AMA, Ask Michaela Anything. And the viewer question is as follows. Whenever I get into a relationship, after a few months, I just want out. Is my attachment style damaged or is something else going on?
Okay, well, that's an interesting question. And of course, we don't know much detail. But we can go into some of the, questions around why do people not want to stay in relationship and talk a little bit about attachment styles, since that's something that's recently gained quite a bit of popularity. It's kind of interesting because in kind of pop psychology or in the zeitgeist of self-help, there's always these kind of themes that people get into. And of course, you can easily see those themes when you see what people put up on Instagram or TikTok. And so there's these prevailing ideas of how we can get better insight into what ails us as humans and in relationship. And for a while there, of course, it was all about narcissists, right? Are you a narcissist? Are you dating a narcissist? That was like a big theme. And then there was, of course, and is the ongoing pulling out of trauma as the answer to everything and everyone. And then I guess the next wave was attachment styles. And before that, it was love languages. And so there's these kind of things that then everybody picks up on. And so while that's quite interesting and also useful because it allows people to actually learn about different lenses, it's just one lens. It's not the be-all, heal-all for anything that ails us in relationship and in our personal lives. And so it's important to know that any of these things, like attachment styles, are just one lens. And so it's a useful lens when you feel like you're always leaving relationships. But it's not the only lens. So I'll start there for a moment, and then we can actually slice it a few different ways as well. So in attachment theory, which was originally designed for early childhood development and in order to support parents in how to be with their children, and then also in supporting individuals on how to look at family of origin issues. That's really what attachment theory was originally created for. And then, of course, as these things go, someone decided, okay, well, if you were anxiously attached as a child, for instance, that probably also influences your relationship. So then came that whole move towards applying the lens of early childhood attachment style to relationship. That's a relatively new way of slicing it. And it does make sense because, of course, our early childhood imprints, both attachment style, also the way people relate to us, how we relate to our caregivers. There's a lot in there that we can say are imprints that inform relationship. And of course, we often work with generational imprints as well as the first love imprint, meaning how we perceive love or how we search love, which runs kind of parallel to what we look at in attachment styles. So for people listening who are not that familiar with attachment styles, it's considered generally that there's 4 attachment styles. There is, of course, secure attachment, which is when you actually had secure attachment to your caregivers and or parents. Usually it's parents. And then there's the 3 that are the not secure ones. And of the 3 that are not secure, you have avoidant, you have anxious, and you have disorganized. And so anxious, of course, is fairly clear in the sense that it's the attachment style where there was a question about, and mind you, I want to really say this because this is important to say. This is one of those rookie mistakes a lot of people make when they go into self-development, where the first round of self-development centers around what other people have done wrong often. And the first round of boundary setting originates from believing other people have done something to you. And then, there's different layers of that. But it's not that your parents were horrible humans. They can be horrible humans, but they don't have to be horrible humans for you to have attached in ways that are not considered secure. And a lot of that also comes from how we perceive our environment and how we see ourselves within the construct of the family. So it's not always the case that your parents treat you badly and that's why you are anxiously attached, for instance. But anxious attachment, typically the quickest way to say it is people have a fairly negative self-belief. They don't see themselves as particularly good or stable or lovable, and they have a great belief in the people around them. So they tend to be just really down on themselves and think other people know better. And there's a certain kind of an anxiety and tension in that, and that's typically called the anxious attachment style. And you can see how that would play out in relationship. And then, of course, we have, avoidant. And avoidant is when whatever happened makes you such that you have a fairly high opinion of yourself. You're pretty secure in yourself, and you feel quite good and confident in yourself, but you don't have a very high opinion of those around you. And so what that typically does is you become extremely self-sufficient. I should also say, I forgot to say that on the anxious attachment styles typically have real abandonment issues, meaning because they think they're not really that good, they have low self-esteem, they don't feel good about themselves, they tend to believe that other people will abandon them, will leave them, and they might have had some instances of abandonment in their childhood, actual or perceived. And then when it comes to avoidant, it's the exact opposite, so to speak. People really think they are quite good, but other people aren't so good. And hence, you kind of avoid forming deep bonds or going all in or being extremely vulnerable because you can't trust other people's actions and behaviors. And so avoidant attachment style types are typically very self-sufficient, really good at taking care of themselves. And in the relationship model that we are talking about here, they tend to feel like they don't necessarily need relationship. They're fine without relationship. And so in anxious, there's like this real strong focus on getting a relationship to feel good about oneself. And in avoidant, there's this very strong, I don't need anybody. I can take care of myself. I can trust you, but I can trust myself. So those are the two main styles that are typically worked with. There's a third style, which is disorganized. And disorganized is essentially both. You're anxious and avoidant, and you push pull. So you need somebody so that you feel good about yourself, and then you essentially become super self-sufficient and don't trust them. So in the disorganized attachment model, there's a lot of chaos in relationship. And of course, when I describe these things, you can see how these particular attachment styles intersect quite nicely with certain, let's say, more clinically diagnosed personality disorder traits and things like that. So, and that's also very important to understand, right? This is a model and it's a lens. And just because you have some of those traits doesn't make you necessarily the full package. And we also have to differentiate between having those traits and having, let's say, a full-blown personality disorder. There is a whole range of behaviors that don't necessarily make you X, but you display these things. And most people display a lot of these behaviors we're talking about when they are under stress. when the going gets tough, when they are compromised, when the environment is compromised. So even people who we would consider are securely attached, meaning they're actually able, which we should also talk about, they're actually able to maintain relationship in what is called a secure way, will have moments of the other styles when the going gets tough. So what's a secure attachment style? And this goes both ways. So secure attachment style, the parents provided certain aspects of behavior, and then that makes the person be able to display certain behaviors and give that to their partner. So in a secure attachment style, you are reliable, which is quite interesting. And of course, the reliability makes it so that people don't feel like, the rug is pulled out from under them when they're in relationship with you. In secure attachment, the parents, and this is, of course, one of the real gifts if somebody knows that about their parenting style or let's say attempts that as a parenting style, is that the parent is present and watching over the child, but within that gives the child the freedom that is appropriate for their development. So they're not helicopter parenting or they're not neglectful. They're there. They let the child make some mistakes or maybe stumble here or there, but they are providing kind of a safe edge for that is appropriate for the child's development. And of course, in an adult, what that means is that a person who has a secure attachment style is able to provide that kind of engagement to a partner where they're neither overly clingy and protective, but they're also not hands off all the way. And that's, of course, in relationship, a real gift, right? Attunement to the other person in the sense that you can feel them, but you can also still feel yourself. That's a big one in secure attachment, is that you don't get thrown completely off course when your partner does something, that you feel is, upsetting or hurtful. And then, the ability to grant independence, meaning understanding that each person has personal freedom and personal sovereignty and independence, and that you can still be together and still have that independence. In parenting, that looks like providing independence commensurate with the development of the child. So those are kind of the secure aspects of attachment that we all would like to have in relationship as well. So I'm saying all of this to say, and then I'll stop for a moment so we can discuss. But I'm saying all of this to say, when the questioner says, do I have a messed up attachment style? Or is my attachment messed up, or is there something else happening? If we're looking at it from the attachment lens, we're looking at somebody who potentially has avoidant attachment. But once again, we don't know. Has this person just seen too many, this is your attachment style, take the quiz, entries on Instagram, or have they been actually working with a therapist about that? Or maybe their partners have said something. But in an, let's say, avoidant attachment style, at the whiff of the clinginess and the whiff of the suddenly being in a dramatic emotional situation with a partner, the avoidant attachment style wants to get out. And now we can say, well, maybe that's right? But maybe it's also a bit overblown, depending on where they sit and if they have worked with that. Last thing I want to say is that, of course, how this goes in partnership, and doesn't matter in what configuration of partnership, is that typically two people of the opposite attract, right? So you typically find the anxious with the avoidant. That's a classic one. But you sometimes find two disorganized attachment styles together, which of course is very chaotic and very hard to work with therapeutically. But it's very often that you find anxious and avoidant together. And within that, there's of course that classic push-pull of the anxious wanting assurance and affirmation, and the avoidant wanting nothing to do with that kind of clinginess.
You mentioned narcissism there, and sometimes it's said, isn't it, that there is a difference between narcissistic traits and narcissistic personality disorder. And I wonder if, and that's more or less a difference of degree, I wonder if there's a similar distinction made in these attachment styles. Is there a threshold above which one can say, I have avoidant attachment disorder? Is it a disorder? Or do we speak in terms of tendencies? That's the first question. And the second question is, if you know you have one of these kinds of tendencies, avoidant and perhaps in the case of the questioner, although of course we can't diagnose that, but for argument's sake, let's say that was the case. How do you work with that? How do you differentiate between your avoidant attachment tendencies flaring up and you want to get out of a perfectly otherwise good situation because of that, or you're actually detecting something's off and your spider senses are tingling in a more accurate way?
Yeah. The first thing to say is it's not a disorder, right? These are just lenses. This is not even, it's not even a full-blown diagnostic tool in the, let's say, in the clinical sense, but it's a really, really useful lens. And so, and I think this is important to say because people glom on to these lenses as if that's like the be-all, end-all. And of course, you can change these things, right? These are not, contrary to some full-blown personality disorders, these things are easily changeable. You have to know what you're doing, and you have to be able to understand why you're anxious and learn coping skills and also learn behaviors and cognitively understand and then behaviorally alter certain ways of behaving. But you can change the way you react in a partnership in the context of, let's say, attachment styles. And you can really remedy that. And that's not always possible with, let's say, disorders. So it's not a disorder. And yes, there is degrees. And like I said earlier, most people display some of that when they're really stressed. And with the degree of stress, the degree of trait or behavior goes up. And then with the degree of, relaxation and balancing of the nervous system. Of course, all of this, I don't want to go there right now, but all of this feeds into nervous system regulation, right? Learning nervous system regulation, understanding your nervous system, understanding and having tools for nervous system regulation, because these traits flare up when you're dysregulated. And of course, in relationship, when one person's dysregulated, and so on and so on. So that said, how do you work with it, and how do we answer the listener who asked the question in the context beyond, let's say, the attachment style? So, and you mentioned once again, being the narcissistic traits versus narcissistic personality disorder, and that's, by the way, a whole other thing, right? It tends to be that proper narcissists, we're talking proper narcissistic personality disorder, tend to attract proper borderline personality disorder, right? So there's like these, which is a much, much more exaggerated form of what we're talking about. Somebody who's extremely self-involved and somebody who's extremely in abandonment, fear patterns. But, on a clinical level, that looks very, very different. But once again, when the going gets tough, when there's a lot of stress, when there's a systemic stress in the person or in the relationship, those patterns or those traits can flare up. And so in the case of our listener here, our questioner, we would have to determine, why are they getting out of relationship? after a couple of months again and again and again, or wants to leave after a certain time. So there's, of course, the first option is there. Well, there's many options. Let's say one option is they're attracting a certain kind of a person that then behaves a certain way, which is a red flag, and then they want to get out, right? So that's one option. And that can, of course, come from imprints. It can come from preferences that have to do with, childhood or relationship conditioning. That can have to do, can be all different kinds of things. But they're attracting a type of person, and then that type of person starts behaving a certain way, and then that's a red flag, and they want to get out. So that's one option. Another option, of course, is if we go with the attachment styles, they are avoidant. They attract, somebody who then wants to essentially overcome that by being extra attentive and extra, let's say, in need for approval or affirmation. And then there comes that moment of real claustrophobia where you feel like you can't possibly be in that. It's way too much work, or way too much drama, or way too much. And even though it's a perfectly good relationship and the person is otherwise perfectly okay, they start behaving very clingy. Well, at that point, if this is an ongoing pattern, but typically the partners are really quite nice partners otherwise, one could consider that maybe this has to do with behavior, where as the relationship progresses and actually the relationship should deepen, the person with the avoidant attachment pattern starts pulling out because they don't want that depth. And then of course, what happens in the other person is that they automatically, so to speak, get polarized into chasing. Well, it's the old push-pull, or into getting insecure, or needing more affirmation than they get. And then that pattern becomes, active, and then it ends in typically the avoidant person leaving, or the avoidant person, flip-flopping between wanting to leave and then deciding, well, maybe not, and then becomes the seesaw of behavior. So that's an option. There could be other things at play. Maybe the person who's constantly leaving is actually not willing or ready or able to be in the kind of relationship that the person that they're with wants, right? And that often comes from the fact that people get into relationships not by really defining the relationships. I talk about this all the time. I bore myself by talking about it, but it's super, super important. If you start dating and you really just want a nice time, but you don't want it to go further, but you don't really know that or say that, and then you end up with someone, and then about 3, 4, 5 months into the relationship, the other person says, where's this going? This needs to be going somewhere. I want this to deepen. I want this to take a shape. And then the other person goes, yeah, I'm not there. Right. So that's not necessarily avoidant. And of course, the danger of these lenses is that often when somebody says, I really don't want more than this, and they're actually very clear, for whatever reason, it's not their time in life. They're committed to other things. That they're in a moment in their career or in their life or in their health where they don't want to deepen relationship beyond a certain point. And they might say that even up front, and then 3, 4, 5 months into, the other person says, but I guess you're just avoidant, or you are a narcissist, or I don't know, you're on the spectrum, right? So there's often people get very vilified for actually having said the thing. And then, the other person goes, but I want more. And that person says, yeah, but I don't want more. I want to leave it as this. And then the other person says, well, but I want more. And then that ends the relationship. So there's all those options. And of course, we don't know which one it is, but it's important to be clear from the beginning why you're getting into relationship. It's much better to go this is how far I want to go with this from the beginning, and risk that the person goes, yeah, I don't want that. And then maybe, maybe as the relationship can't progress, you'll notice what else there could be, or it progresses and you feel something deeper. But that can't be the case if you don't know what you're getting into.
Sometimes I think of it in 3 stages. That is how to deal with when this sort of avoidant attachment feeling, in this case, comes up. The first step, which is sometimes the hardest one, is to recognize that's what's happening. That's not easy. Sometimes the reactivity, sort of fight or flight state, it's difficult to notice that's a state. It can feel just like reality. And so the first step is to recognize that, and that's not easy. Therapy helps with that. Various other things can help with that. And then I think the second step is to regulate the nervous system. Some sort of de-escalation. Once it's been established that you don't need that fight or flight response, you're not in immediate danger, the next step is to regulate that and then reassess the situation. Then you can determine more easily, okay, is there something going on here that I need to respond to, or is this just sort of my thing coming up? And that's not easy to navigate, and I think that's why, as you say, it's good to have counseling, therapy or something to bounce that off, because it's not easy to parse that, especially at the beginning. So I wonder if you have any comments on that, especially on nervous system regulation techniques.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, in the sense that, very often, and it doesn't even have to just be attachment styles, but where very often when we have these strong reactions, you can't do anything till you can see clearly, right? And I think for most people I've worked with, the moment they can actually have enough distance from themselves to at least know that they're reacted, then that's 99% of the game, so to speak, right? Because you suddenly are not gripped by it. And so in general, when that kind of a moment happens, regardless if it's with an intimate partner or even at work or with children or, whatever it may be, is the easiest way to know that you're off or that you're in fight or flight is not by recognizing it mentally, because you won't. One of the key features of fight or flight in the nervous system, and that's why I said earlier, there's a whole other conversation about understanding how your nervous system works to keep you safe, or to keep you regulated, or to keep you functioning and coping, is, that's a worthwhile endeavor all in itself. And so within one of the key features of fight or flight in the human body is that actually fight or flight somewhat cuts out, on the top level, cuts out rational thinking. And on the, let's say, ramp up to a full fight or flight event, reduces rational thinking, because rational cognitive understanding of the situation is too slow when it comes to an actual survival moment. And so in an actual survival moment, the nervous system cuts out your conscious thoughts about it, so it can act purely on the instinct that comes from millions of years of development of a nervous system, right, of a human or even pre-human. And so that said, that key feature of your rational thought being gone makes it very hard to make appropriate steps in a moment where you are triggered. And so the key there is not to try and understand what's happening. The key there is to find some kind of bodily reference that allows you to know you are in that state. And so it has to be in the body, and then you have to train yourself over and over and over to recognize that particular alarm system, like that key feature. So for instance, for me, it's my pulse. I might otherwise not know that I'm in fight or flight, but I can feel my pulse, right, relatively easily, meaning I can feel the pulse in my body. And so there's a certain kind of frequency of pulse when I'm over that, threshold, I know that I'm probably in fight or flight or stressed. And so I don't need to know what it's about, or if I got triggered, or if it's just accumulated stress. I can just feel that and know I need to regulate. Or when I'm done with X, I need to go regulate, right? Because sometimes this happens in the middle of an activity that can't be stopped. And so that bodily marker is different for different people. Some people notice that they're breathing really quickly, shallowly, or some people have tingling in their hands and feet. Some people have very specific thoughts that are kind of like old scripts of old imprints that pull up, where it's like, I guess I gotta do this by myself, or no one can do this like I can do it, or uh, there we go again, nobody loves me, or whatever people say, right? It could be a script, but mostly it's a bodily marker that says, okay, you are now above a certain rev in your nervous system, and you do need to stop that. And so the first and foremost, and really the thing that everybody at some point could acquire for themselves for well-being is a bodily reference point for fight or flight or for stress, right? And which is the same, it's the same, path to, to an event, so to speak, a nervous system event. So that's the most important thing. And when you can detect that without even knowing what it is, and you can go, okay, I'm going to step out of whatever I'm doing as soon as I can, and I'm going to de-escalate my system. Now, how do you de-escalate your system? Well, all the usual stuff. Moving your body, wiggling your fingers and your toes, taking a few deep breaths, moving in ways that kind of free up the body, feeling your feet on the ground. If you can lay down, great. If you can, have a shower, great. If you can lay on the grass and feel your body on the earth, all of those things will help. And then, of course, if you are working with somebody who has techniques, and those techniques have shown to work. Not all techniques work for everyone, particularly when it comes to breaths. There's, certain techniques do not work for all people, but you find something that works for you, you work with that. And only when you're de-escalated do you come back to even considering the situation.
Thank you. I think that's very useful indeed. I wonder if you have any concluding remarks or reflections on this subject before we end for today.
Well, I mean, as always, there's so much that could be said about any of those points, right? But I think it's important to remember, if there's anything I want to stress again, is it's important to remember that we all carry those traits, but that not everything that looks like that trait is that trait. And it's really important to tread very lightly around all these lenses. Doesn't matter if it's attachment theory or personality disorders or the good old masculine, feminine concepts that, have gone way beyond a lens into some kind of a lifestyle. It's like you want to tread really, really lightly around all of those things, because human beings are much more, let's say, subtly sliced and built than those lenses, which are often very, very heavy-handed and often also connected with some dogmatic underpinnings. So use the lenses as they're necessary or needed, and discard the rest, and understand that you're much more complex than a label or a box that is designed to, was originally designed to give just the lens, and then becomes, of course, a whole machine of other things. And, I can't say enough about somatic awareness and learning how your body gives signals. And that's, I think, really, really important. And of course, I'd be remiss to not point out that, of course, we do teach very specific regulation practices in the form of the nonlinear movement method, where there's all kinds of modalities that teach you how to have good interoceptive awareness, meaning actually feeling what's happening within you, which allows for that somatic, point to be defined. There's also release modalities. There's all kinds of modalities that allow you to be more intimate with all aspects of your nervous system, and then learn how to reliably regulate. And so we can probably link, to the nonlinear movement method below. And classes will start again in the fall. So there's always a way to try those things out if somebody's interested. And of course, if you're interested in learning how to facilitate that, we do have a teacher training, and it's an embodiment teacher training that includes the facilitation of nonlinear movement method as a modality, and further than that, the entire understanding of the nervous system and how to work with the nervous system in facilitation, and in therapy. So, and that's happening again in May of 2025, and we'll link to that below.
Very interesting, Michaela. Thank you. And thank you to the questioner for sending in that question. And if you're listening and you have another question like that, or about anything we talk about, or even a theme you'd like us to explore, please feel free to email those to workshops@michaelaboehm.com or steve@michaelaboehm.com, and we will add it to our menu of topics. Michaela, thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve.